you are listening to, you are absolutely listening to the George Espinlov Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm. Now, with no further ado, here comes Georgie!
Thank you. I just can't hardly take it. Thank you. Night after night. Night after night, the crowd just seems to get more excited. You're more excited tonight than you were last night. And I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you'll be more excited tomorrow night than you were tonight than you were last night. Everybody got that, right? Okay. Hey, listen to all my friends down the street, around the corner, across this great nation and around the world. Welcome to the George Espinlov Show that comes to you Monday through Friday, live, here at the Funny Farm in a place called Our World. We have no idea where our world is. We just live here. We don't have a specific mailing address, but we do have an email. So, email us, George C.E., that's George C.E. at Comcast.net, George C.E. at Comcast.net. We're getting more email every single day, and we're answering every single one, and we're sending it right back at you. So, keep them coming. We appreciate it. You excite us by sending us email. GeorgeCE at Comcast.net. Did we have a good show last night? My, Lou Ann Hunt, she just talked with us and sang, and we chatted, and it was just delightful to have her on here, and I hope that we can get her back, and sometime soon. Tonight, we have another great guest. Now do this. This is what I want you to do. Right now, get up on the edge of your seat, because that's where you're going to end up at. You're going to be right up on the edge of your seat. You're going to have your head right close to your listening device, because you don't want to miss a word that Steve Perry is going to be bringing us. Now look, I've said it countless times. You that have been hanging out with me all these months and months and months know that the men and women that serve in the United States Armed Forces are my hero. Men that served in the past, men and women that are serving right now, they are my heroes. I am delighted to be able to have a brother that fought in Viet Nam. And it's my privilege, it's my honor to introduce to you this man who has written a book entitled Bright Light. So, as Charlie says, you want to say it, Charlie? You want me to say it? Okay. As Charlie says, with no further ado, Steve, welcome to the George Espinlov Show.
Thank you, George. Good evening.
First of all, I want to say thank you for your service. And second of all, I want to say welcome home, my brother.
I want to say thank you for your service and welcome home to you, and Semper Fi too, George.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very, very much. I get goosebumps. I think it was Friday night. We had Colonel Lee Ellis, who was shot down over in North Vietnam in 1967. He was with us. I get goosebumps when I talk to my brothers. Sometimes I get quite emotional. And one night we laughed and we chatted and we cried. and we wasn't ashamed to let people know that we cried. There are times that the emotions just can't be held in, and I make no apologies if that should happen to me tonight. My brother, I thank you for taking the time and being on our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Steve, your early life, and how you ended up going into the service.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles, California, in what was then the Queen of the Angels Hospital. And I was raised by a wonderful family. My father was a veteran of the Second World War, the Army Air Corps, and his name was George Perry, and my mom, Estelle. They were just wonderful people. And they raised me and my brothers and sisters with respect for God and respect for our country and respect for our elders. And, we went to church every Sunday, and we learned that respect that, unfortunately, I think is missing in a lot of our culture today.
Mm-hmm.
But I was a normal kid, in Southern California, and growing up, and about 1959 or so, I built my own 9-foot 2-inch surfboard. Couldn't afford to buy a commercially made one, so my best friend across the street, Chuck Bell, and another friend, Richard Sliker, and I went and bought surfboard blanks and the fiberglass cloth and all the stuff you use, made our own surfboards. Half that resin ended up on my father's garage floor. But surfboards turned out pretty well. We used to go surf Huntington Beach. It's the surf capital of the world. And that was one of our pastimes. Also had a lot of other things I did as a kid. I used to like to mess around with chemistry and used to build rockets. I love building rockets. And I can remember building one and firing it off in my dad's garage. I didn't really think that the rocket was going to go anywhere, but I had really developed the funnel and the fuel and a nose cone and the whole thing. And it went, and it shot right into the roof of the garage, and the engine kept firing. I was afraid I was going to burn the house down. So I got the lecture, no more rockets in the garage. But basically, the normal run-of-the-mill kid, like I write in my book, that's who I encountered when I went in the military, was the boy next door, the one who sat next to you in church, the one who mowed your lawn. These were the guys that I served with.
You're exactly right, because we were the kids next door to each other, and it didn't matter what part of the country we came from either. We might have different accents, and some might be just a hair older than some, but still, we were all ordinary, run-of-the-mill, good old American boys.
Exactly, and that doesn't matter whether you were drafted or enlisted. And I have high respect and regard for everyone who served in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When was it that you decided to go into the Army?
Well, in 1965, I had moved out of my parents' house, and I was living in Newport Beach, California. And one night at a party on Balboa Island, a friend named Jim Sexton came to the party, and he had a poster, Special Forces poster. And actually, I still have it in my scrapbook somewhere, if I can find my scrapbook. But it had the pictures of the different Special Forces flashes and some kind of a challenge. Are you good enough to earn the Green Beret?
Mm-hmm.
And Jim said, I think we ought to go down and enlist in the Army. And so 4 of us did. Jim, myself, Bert Merriman, and another fellow named Chris Cox all went down the next day to the induction center in Los Angeles, and we signed up for the Army, and we signed up for Special Forces. And we all hoped and thought we were going to become Green Berets. As it turned out, we all went through basic training together at Fort Ord, California, which I understand is kind of a ghost town today compared to what it was in 1965. Graduated from basic training and got sent. Bert Merriman and I got sent to Fort Rucker, Alabama for combat engineer training. Chris Cox got sent to one of the forts, I think in Columbus, Georgia, to MP school. And Jim Sexton was determined he was too young to become or to go into Special Forces. They had a cutoff. He had to be a certain age limit, and he was too young, so they sent him off to some school and then off to Alaska. Jim Saxton, Chris Cox, had asthma, and he washed out of the training in EIT, and they actually medically discharged him from the military. And he moved up to Aspen, Colorado, and he was a pretty good entertainer. He played the guitar, and he became a professional entertainer in Aspen, Colorado. And, he was a skier, so he lived his life on the slopes and singing his ballads. But Bert and I both made it through AIT, and then on to jump school at Fort Benning, Georgia, then off to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. When we got to Fort Bragg, they did some more testing, and depending on your capabilities, they selected you for one of the specialties in Special Forces. I got sent to the medical school, and my friend Bert got sent to the engineering school. And we went through our training, and I was at Fort Bragg in training for a year in my medical training with just a couple of side trips, one to Fort Sam Houston, Texas for 10 weeks for internal medicine and some tropical medicine training, and then off from Sam Houston, I got sent on OJT to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which was the helicopter training facility for the Army, and got a lot of experience in traumatic burns and traumatic injury from helicopter crashes and things that occurred during the training cycles there at Fort Rucker. And then from Fort Rucker back to Fort Bragg, where I completed my medical training. And my fellow classmates got sent everywhere in the country, and I got held behind for a time. And during that time, I got sent up into the Smoky Mountains up around Morganton, North Carolina, where I was a medical specialist in charge of taking care of the war games that were going on between Special Forces and the 82nd Airborne as part of a mountain training exercise. I got bored with that and wondered why I hadn't got sent to Vietnam like some of my friends, so I called Mrs. Alexander, who was the assignment specialist at the Pentagon, and I requested to go to Vietnam. And within a month, I got my orders and shipped out. They give you a short leave first. I went home and visited my family in California, and then off to Fort Lewis, Washington, on my way to Vietnam.
Did you go to? Did you fly to Nam, or did you get to take a ship ride?
No, I went to Fort Lewis. It was freezing to death. Fort Lewis. I'd never been in such a cold climate in my life. It was December of '67, and I met a young man there that I want to talk more about later. His name was Ken Cryan. Another boy next door. He was from Central or Northern California, Santa Cruz area, I think. And, we kind of hung out together, and 2 or 3 days after we got to Fort Lewis, they packed us in an airplane, and they flew us to Vietnam. And they flew us via the Aleutian Islands. We landed on some godforsaken island that was covered with snow and ice. They rolled 55-gallon drums of jet fuel out and hand cranked them into the aircraft to refuel. And we left there and landed in Yokohama, Japan, and from there to Cameron Bay.
When you went through your medical training, I mean that was quite extensive, and then I guess toward the end you had to go in front of a panel of doctors.
Oh, the medical training was very extensive. It lasted for approximately a year, and we were trained in all aspects of medicine. And it was like I would say it's like a cram course, a complete medical school. And in the end, the last 6 or 8 weeks, and my mind, loses the actual number of weeks and times. But at the very end, we went to what was then called Dog Lab. And the way it worked was they picked up stray dogs from the various kennels in North Carolina that were set aside for euthanasia. And they brought them to the fort, and they assigned each one of us a patient. And then we got to know our patient, and we did a full medical workup on him, checked him out just like we would a normal human. And then they took him in a chamber, and this will horrify somebody listening, I'm sure. A dog's anatomy in the leg muscles are almost identical to a human's anatomy. And that's why they chose dogs. They took the dog into a chamber, and they shot it through the meaty part of the leg. And then we had to take it into the operating room. It was done under anesthesia, of course.
Mm-hmm.
We took it in the operating room, and we debrided the wound. When a high caliber or high velocity bullet goes through flesh, it kills flesh as it goes through. And in order to properly treat it, you have to go in and debride or cut out the dead tissue around the bullet hole itself through the muscle tissue and clean it out, any hair or dirt or anything that got in. And then the normal treatment was to leave it open for 3 days and treat with penicillin and streptomycin. And then after 3 days, we sutured the wound up and nursed the dog back to health. And after the dog was completely normal and back to health again, it was taken back into the operating room, put under anesthesia by us, and the leg was amputated, like you do on a human, to teach us how to do an amputation. Amputated, sutured up, stabilized, and then was given an overdose of the anesthesia. So that was the end of Dog Lab. At the end of Dog Lab, we went through in front of a medical board of 3 or 4 doctors from various backgrounds in medicine. And just as doctors do in medical school, we were questioned about anything that they decided to question us about. And they fired questions rapidly at us. You have a man walks in your dispensary in Vietnam, and he's got a temperature of 103, and he's got a red rash on his right shoulder, and he's got this, and he's got that. And what would you do? What does he have? And you'd have to diagnose him and give the treatment, including milligrams per kilogram of body weight of whatever medicine was to be used. And they just went through for about an hour each. We had to stand and be grilled by these doctors. It's very tough. A few of the people who had made it all the way through all of the training up to that point washed out at that point and couldn't stand the pressure that they were put under by these doctors in their questioning. And that was the end. When you finished that section, we went through 8 more week training in Special Forces tactics, and then we were ready for service.
If people want to buy your book, and I want excuse me, I want to inject this right here. They can go to brightlight1968.com. Is that correct?
That's correct. Or to Book Locker directly, either one. It can also be purchased at Amazon or Borders or anywhere else. But quite frankly, Amazon and Borders like to keep most of the profits from an author's book. So, and the price is about the same unless you get free shipping. So my website, www.brightlight1968.com or booklocker.com are the two places that are best to go. Book Locker actually has an ebook that's only $9.95. You can download it directly.
Cool. For the Kindle?
What's that?
For the Kindle?
Not Kindle.
Okay.
I didn't like it when an author signs up for Kindle, they give up a lot of rights that I didn't want to give up. This is just an ebook that can be read on any ebook reader or any computer or iPhone or whatever.
Okay. I got you. Brightlight1968.com. And there, ladies and gentlemen, you can look at a whole lot of pictures that's on Steve's site and read some interesting things. But I wanted to throw that in real quick because I have a tendency a lot of times of if I don't say something when I first think of it, I'm getting to the point anymore that it can leave me faster than it came to me, and then I can never find it again. Are you getting like that too, Steve?
Yep. The older I get, the worse it gets.
Your book, Bright Light. When did you write this?
I wrote it. Let me tell a little story about that.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier, George, that you never talked much about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Well, neither did I. When I came home from Vietnam in 1968, the culture was pretty anti-war and anti-Vietnam, and I got called a baby killer and a lot of other things that, really hurt. And they really hurt a lot of Vietnam vets. And I didn't talk much about the war or anything for a long, long time. In fact, to give you one example of how bad things were, I mentioned Chris Cox, who was one of my friends who enlisted in the Army with me. Well, when he got let go for asthma, he returned to Southern California and pretty much became a hippie. Had long hair, was hanging out with the hippies and what have you. When I got home from Vietnam, shortly after I got home, I got called to the Army headquarters with my family, and I got issued some medals that they didn't have time to give me before I left Vietnam. And like Stephen Stills wrote in one of his songs, I've got some medals hanging on my chest. I've got some good ones, but I've missed the best. But my wife at the time thought that was pretty awesome, and so she had a wonderful frame made and had all these medals, Bronze Stars and Purple Hearts and Arcoms and what have you, all framed up in this nice frame. And she hung it in the living room. And Chris Cox came to the house one day and he saw him hanging there, and he says, I'm surprised that you have those hanging on the wall. He says, I'll bet you within a month you'll have them hidden somewhere. And that was one of the guys that I enlisted with.
Mm-hmm.
So attitude was pretty poor in the country toward us at that time. And I hope that the people listening tonight will hear some reasons why that attitude was 100% wrong, and should have never existed.
I-
But back to what you asked, and I forgot what you asked.
And I probably forgot what I asked you too. No, no. When did you write the book?
Oh, okay. So I didn't talk about Vietnam for a long time either. In 2000, and everything that we did in Vietnam was classified top secret.
Mm-hmm.
And we were debriefed when we were leaving Vietnam. I was debriefed at my camp at Phu Bai, and from there I went to special ops headquarters in Da Nang, and I was debriefed there. And from there I went to Saigon, and I was debriefed, and then I flew home. And at each of these debriefings, I was told that everything that I did in Vietnam would be top secret forever, and I would never be able to tell anybody anything about what I did in Vietnam. And I didn't until the information was declassified in 2004. And so in 2004, I started recalling some of these things because I had never talked to anybody about them, told anybody about them. And I, remembered more and more of the stories, and then eventually I got together with some of the other people that I actually survived the war with, and shared, more details of the stories. And in 2008, I met a guy at church who was he wrote screenplays. And I was interested in the possibility of telling this story on television in a story like MASH, because there's so much to the whole experience that I thought that would be a good venue for it. So I started exploring that, and having family in Southern California, and some of them even working in the industry, I asked them to check it out, and I was told that unless I wrote a book, that no one would even talk to me about doing a TV show or a movie,
Mm-hmm.
Because of liabilities and copyright issues and what have you. So I started writing this screenwriter. He wanted to know more about my story, so he every week he would encourage me, hey, write a little bit down. Show me what you're talking about. And I would write, 10 pages and one particular story, and I would show him. And he'd take it home and read it, and then he'd tell me, hey, that was really good. Write some more. Tell me more about this guy. Or expand this a little bit over here. And kind of prodded me along for, 6 months or so. By the time the 6 months was over, I got this word that I couldn't really get a TV show or a movie unless I wrote a book. So I compiled everything I had written and found that I had a book pretty much written, and just did some editing and put it together and started looking into publishing. I first approached a few normal publishers, and I was told no one wants to know about Vietnam. So I looked into self-publishing, and that's how I ended up with Book Locker, and they did a fine job of publishing my book for me. So that's how it came about, and I decided to do it, George, because I wanted to preserve the history of what we did in Vietnam, because it had been top secret until 2004. At that point, we were given the Presidential Unit Citation, and the unit citation itself, part of it's printed on the back of my book, and it explains many of the top secret things that we could never talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Trips to North Vietnam, trips to Laos, trips to Cambodia, and various things that we did. So that's how I ended up writing the book, wanting to preserve the history of my unit and correct some of the misinformation that had been spread by the media and by our politicians during the 60s and 70s.
You mentioned when you came home the turmoil that our country was in. I went to Nam in 1966. I came back in 1968, And when I come back in June of 1968, our country was on fire, literally on fire, uh, with the riots and the protesting and all those things. And it wasn't isolated just in one small section of the country. It was happening all across America, wasn't it, Steve?
Exactly. I mean, and I don't remember the exact dates of things, but there was the Watts riots, the Chicago riots, what's going on, and all of that. The Summer of Love in California were all going on at the same time. It was crazy when I came home from Vietnam.
Yeah, it was almost, it was almost safer in Nam than it was back here in the world. It was some, and unless people actually lived in those times, there's no way they can even begin to understand what shape our country was in and what was taking place right inside of our own country. When
it was sad.
It was sad. It was sad, and this country was coming apart at the seams. Divisiveness and hatred and we were called the baby killers and it just was on and on and on. So most of us that came home, we just didn't say anything to anybody, and we just kept it all inside, which isn't always a good thing. When you first got to Nam, a bunch of the other fellows was sent into different parts of the country, and you and another man was held back for a while, wasn't you?
Yes, we arrived at Cameron Bay, and everyone was held in Cameron Bay for, and I don't remember the exact number of days, but about a week to kind of acclimate, because I think the temperature was 95 and the humidity was about 105, and so they let you sit there for about a week to acclimate to that. Then they loaded the Special Forces personnel on deuce and a half. This amazed me. Here we are in a war zone. They put us in the back of the deuce and a half, which was open truck, and they drove us from Cameron Bay to Nha Trang, to Special Forces headquarters. Through beautiful countryside, by rice paddies, by lots of people who could potentially have turned around, pulled out a weapon, and wiped us out.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was a little strange. We had no weapons. We had nothing. We were just sitting in the back of an open truck. But they took us to Nha Trang, and once we got to Nha Trang, the Special Forces personnel were assigned to their duty assignments. And the normal duty for a Green Beret in Vietnam was an A team, a B team, or a C team. And the most common was the A team, which was basically a 12-man team, consisted of two of each of the specialties and two officers who lived out in the jungle in an encampment, and were advisors and teachers and helpers to the Vietnamese people. This is where people who call Vietnam veterans baby killers, they don't have a clue what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
My brothers went out into the orphanages and took care of orphans and brought them toys and went into the villages and treated sick villagers and helped them to irrigate, to devise ways to better irrigate their crops and all kinds of things that were done in these Special Forces camps. And that was a normal assignment for Special Forces. So the men I arrived with all got assigned out, except for this Ken Cryan that I mentioned before from California that I met at Fort Lewis, Washington. He and I were still sitting there at least a week after everyone else was assigned. And it's now December of 1967, getting close to Christmas. The day before Christmas, the commanding officer calls us in his office and he had a very strange look on his face, and he said, "I'm sorry to inform you, Sergeant Perry and Sergeant Klein, that you've been assigned to Command and Control North." Well, Ken and I stood there with egg on our face because we didn't know what Command and Control North was, and we didn't know why, we were kind of left behind for a week after everyone else got their assignments. But we would soon find out. The following day was Christmas Eve, and they took us to the airport and put us on a C-130 Blackbird. And George, I don't know if you remember seeing Blackbirds in Viet Nam, but they were C-130s or 123s or Caribous.
Mm-hmm.
They were painted with a black and gray camouflage instead of the normal green and tan. But we referred to them as Blackbirds, and they were top secret, agency-type planes. But they flew us up to Da Nang, and when we arrived on the airstrip, there was a Jeep waiting for us. He welcomed us. I don't remember what his name was. Put our duffel bags in the Jeep, and he drove us to CNC headquarters in Da Nang, and which was a compound, an old French building surrounded by high walls and concertina wire. There was a gate and a Vietnamese guard at the gate with a machine gun, and they brought us in the gate, and the guy who picked us up said, "Well, you guys, you're all on your own tonight because everybody's downtown at some Christmas party somewhere. So I'm going to take you in the bar. You guys are on your own. You can just help yourself to whatever you want." And the name of the bar was the Gunfighter Saloon. And that's what it looked like, the Gunfighter Saloon. So Ken and I sat there in this bar on Christmas Eve, 1967, and commenced to get drunk and make ourselves steak sandwiches with delicious French bread. And still not knowing what Command and Control North or MACV SOG was or what it stood for. So we went to bed, late at night, and early in the morning we were woken up and we were called into the office of the commanding officer of CNC North, who was at the time Colonel Jack Warren, who was a very professional military, what we'd call him was strapped soldier. Everything was in perfect order on his uniform. Looked like he just walked out of a textbook. And he welcomed us to MACV SOG, which he referred to as the Studies and Observation Group, and CNC North is the Command and Control North. He told us that we would be assigned to FOB-1, which is Forward Operational Base Number 1 at Phu Bai. Now, Phu Bai is a large area. There was a Marine encampment there, a CB base, but right down the hill from our camp was a village, and its name was actually Phu Long. So FOB-1 was up the hill from the village of Phu Long. And so Jack Warren quickly explained the mission of MACV SOG and how we would be further advised when we got to our FOB. But he did tell us that everything that we did and heard and saw would remain secret forever. We could never, ever reveal anything that we saw or did, and made us sign a statement to that effect before we left. He told us that we would be, or that MACV SOG ran missions into Laos, across the border, and also into North Vietnam and into the demilitarized zone when necessary. And all of that was top secret information until, like I said, 2004. So the next day, that was Christmas Day. The following day, they brought us back out to the airstrip and they put us on, this time, what we called King Bees. Old I think they were called C-Night helicopters, CH-46, old Marine choppers. I remember seeing them at El Toro when I was growing up. And these were flown by Vietnamese pilots, who were very good pilots, by the way. And, it was a real experience. No doors, 30 caliber air-cooled machine gun hanging out the door, and Vietnamese crew chief who said hi in his broken English. And we got in, they took off, they flew over the harbor there at Da Nang, where there was a number of Navy ships and a hospital ship in the harbor, and then above a mountain range and across some lots of rice paddies and little harbors and bays with fishing nets. Vietnam was an absolute beautiful country, and it was a beautiful thing to fly over it. Hard to believe that there was a war going on.
Mm-hmm.
Landed, came to Phu Bai and circled the camp. The camp was originally an old French camp, and it had some old French bunkers at the four corners of the camp. It had zigzagging trench lines and sandbags and mortar pits. I could only guess the actual size was probably 400 meters long and 100 meters wide. And on the outside of it was an old French minefield that was probably 100 feet deep. And then there was another layer of concertina wire around it, and there was an American-laid minefield on the outside. No one knew where the mines were in the French minefield. Of course, we knew where the mines were in the American minefield. So we landed in the camp. We were greeted by the commanding officer who held us in a little formation out in front of the camp, and he explained to us the mission of FOB-1 that was primarily to run reconnaissance teams into Laos, into the Ashau Valley, into the DMZ, in support of whoever needed support, the first cab, the Marines, whoever was looking for information and intel on a particular area. We were the ones they sent out there. And he told me that I was a medic and I had a critical MOS, and that I would be assigned to work as a chase medic or to work in the dispensary, but that he was very short on personnel for reconnaissance teams, and if I chose to, I could volunteer, and he would accept my volunteering for a team. So I thought about it overnight, and the following day I went tapped on his office and reported to him and said, "Sir, I thought about it, and I'd like to serve on a reconnaissance team. Looks like you have plenty of medics to me, and I can, help out in the dispensary when I'm not out on a mission or training." So he loved that, congratulated me on my decision, and he assigned me to Spike Team Idaho. We refer to it as ST Idaho. And took me over, or he had one of his junior officers take me over and introduced me to the 1-0. And the way the team worked, there was 12 men on the team, 3 Americans and 9 Vietnamese. 3 Americans were numbered 1-0, who's the team leader, the 1-1, who's the second in command, and the 1-2, who's the radio man and third in command. And then the Vietnamese also were numbered, and they were numbered the opposite way. 0-1 was the Vietnamese team leader, and so on down the line. So he took me over and he introduced me to the 1-0. The 1-0's name was Glenn Lane, and he was from Odessa, Texas. He was a staff sergeant, about 6'3", really nice guy. Really learned a lot from him. And the other American on the team at the time was Tim Kirk. Tim, still alive today, lives up in Minnesota with his family. another great guy. And the only other one that I know is alive today from that team is Vietnamese, and his name is Nguyen Hap. And I think he might be listening tonight. Hap, if you're out there, hello. He lives in Houston, Texas with his family, and he was the team interpreter. And in 1975, after we had abandoned Vietnam, and the last planes were leaving Tan Son Nhut Airport, Hap managed to throw his kids on the back of a C-130, open tailgate, and then somehow, miraculously, was pulled aboard himself as it ran down the runway. And he managed to bring his family and start a business in Texas, and he's lived there ever since.
So
that's the introduction to the arrival in Vietnam.
So you had 12-man team, 3 Americans and 9 Vietnamese.
That's the makeup of the team. Now, the 1-0 could choose, depending on the target, to use all 12 men or to use 6 men. In most cases, we used 6, and that was either with 2 Americans or 3 and 3 Vietnamese. And on rare occasions and we had to be really secretive and quiet and sneaky, we may even go out with 2 men, which would have been 2 Americans, the team leader and the radio man. That was rare, but it happened.
Was the radio man an American?
Radio man was American, and he carried a PRC-25. If you know what that is, it was a very heavy, bulky radio, nothing like the stuff we have today. And we also carried 3 different radios. We carried the PRC-25, which was the primary communication between the aircraft in the air and radio relay sites that may be set up on hilltops, manned by Army, Marines, whoever. It was our only communication when we were out 50 miles away from our camp in the jungle. It was our only way of calling for help, calling for extraction, or reporting an enemy target that we may have spotted. But we also carried emergency radios, which at the time were called URC-10s, and they were 2 pieces. We carried them in the pockets, the breast pockets of our jungle fatigues. They had a thick wire that ran between the 2 pieces. One piece was the battery, the other piece was the radio, and all you had to do was flip a switch on, and it would send out a homing beacon signal, which was picked up by any friendly aircraft in the air, and they would respond to that signal. And if you did not click on and acknowledge, they would likely call in an airstrike on that radio. So the idea was if someone captured that radio and turned it on, didn't know what they were doing, they were going to get bombed. But we also carried another little radio, and I forget the number, but it was a squad radio, kind of like a little walkie-talkie. And the 3 Americans had one of those, and they carried it. It was actually taped to the strap of our web gear, so it was right by our face, and we could whisper to the team leader when we were separated for short distance.
You know, our equipment that we used in the bush seems almost primitive compared to what the fellows are using out there today, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievable. You know, if we had the cell phones like we have today, we could have done a lot of things that we couldn't do then, I'll tell you.
So once you were assigned to a team, how long was it before you went on your first mission?
It wasn't very long for me because we had a real shortage of teams, and things were really hot. We went on a training mission within a week of my arrival, probably 2 or 3 days after my arrival. We went on a training mission, but before we did that, my team sergeant, Sergeant Lane, took us out in the rice paddies. He had laid out a compass course for us which ended up in the village of Fulong and at a little bar. And we stopped and had a couple beers with the team. But he was teaching map reading. He was teaching E&E techniques. We used our radios and team movement. So, basic training in how the team would operate once it was in the jungle. But 3 days after I got there, I went on a training mission, which was on the Perfume River, which is a river that runs out of the mountains and down through the city of Hue.
Mm-hmm.
And this is January, the first week in January of 1968. And the Marines had believed that there was munitions being smuggled down the river into the city of Hue. And this was before the Tet Offensive of 1968, which I think was January 29th is when it broke out.
Mm-hmm.
They had smuggled a lot of munitions into the city before January 29th. Well, that's what this training mission was. This is quite a training mission. They took 2 teams out, and they took us down along the river, and they set us up along the riverbank, and we sat there all night long and waited. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning, SFC Scow, the leader of this particular training mission, jumped up and said, "Open fire." And he had an M60 machine gun, and he was spraying out across the water with an M60. And the only light that I had was the light from the tracers from that M60. And you can see us 2 sampans out there in the water. And he was firing on the sampans, so everyone else opened fire on the sampans with M79s and Car-15s is what we carried. And pretty quickly the sampan caught fire. You could see some personnel jump in the water, and then the sampan blew up, and the remains sunk, and that was the end of the story. It got pitch dark again. Sergeant Scow said, "Cease fire," and we all sat there the rest of the night. I write more details in my book, but that was a training mission. We went back and we went through a debriefing like we would on a normal mission. Went back to the camp, and I think I was taken out on the range a couple of times and got to fire some weapons that I never fired back in the States. The Claymore, M79, I had fired plenty. But the law, some of the things that we would or could use in the field. We also had a complete assortment of foreign weapons and American weapons that weren't used very much by conventional forces. Thompson submachine guns, grease guns, Sten guns, different things with silencers, and that we could go in for prisoner snatch. And if we had to do some shooting, it wouldn't be detected by the enemy close by. So we went to the range and fired all those things. And then we got put on standby. I write about this in my book. We got put on standby because a pilot or 2 pilots got shot down over North Vietnam, and they were going to send us to rescue them or try to rescue them. I found this very interesting that you just had this gentleman on the other day who was shot down over North Vietnam. But we went on standby, and it took quite a while for the brass and the Pentagon and the White House and whoever had to put it all together to put together the logistics. But when they finally got it together, they brought us up to the Marine base, and they loaded us on a C-130, and we were all fully decked out in our war gear with all our camouflage paint on and everything else, and we thought we were going directly to North Vietnam. But they took us to Nong Kham Phanom, Thailand, NKP as it was called. And when we got there, they didn't even know why we were there. That's the logistics that I was talking about, because I believe it was Navy pilots and NKP was Air Force, and everything was secret. Everything was top secret, and of course it's top secret. They're going to send Americans into North Vietnam, and these pilots were shot down within 6 miles of Hanoi, so it was very close to the city of Hanoi. When we went to NKP, I write about the details of that fiasco in my book. It's funny stuff. Next day, we were briefed by an Air Force general about the mission. He told us more details than we already had. Told us that we'd be flying on Jolly Green Giants. Told us how long it would take. It was about a 6-hour flight from NKP to Hanoi by Jolly Green Giant, and they had to refuel along the way. So there I was in camp for less than 3 weeks on my way to North Vietnam with 2 teams on 2 Jolly Green Giants. And we flew, one of the helicopters had a problem, and we had to make an emergency landing in the jungles, in a clearing in the middle of the jungles in northern Laos. And when we got out of the choppers, the teams formed defensive perimeter around the helicopters because we had no idea who might be there. And one of the Vietnamese accidentally fired his M79, which triggered more firing until we could get them all quieted down. Of course, that was in itself an international incident because we had armed Vietnamese troops in Laos, which is a violation of the Southeast Asia Treaty that we had signed. There wasn't supposed to be any armed Vietnamese troops in Laos, and here we were. But we repaired the damage on the chopper. The chopper crew did. We loaded back up. And I mentioned that the Air Force colonel who was flying the lead Jolly Green Giant was in charge of the mission. He could call it off. He could put us on the ground. He could do whatever he wanted. He could turn around and go back. He was in charge. We took off and continued the mission. We flew to what I recall being refueling Site 51, which was on the northern border between Laos and North Vietnam. It was in Laos, but right on the border. And it was a strange place. There was a little village on stilts. I think they were Montagnard people. And once again, they rolled 55-gallon drums out and hand-cranked the fuel into the Jolly Greens. We got out of the choppers to stretch our legs, and we found a Russian biplane it was upside down on the side of the runway. And we were told by the one American that we saw at the place that biplane was flown by a Russian pilot and had been shot down the day before by an Air America door gunner with an M16. Amazing story. Never thought I would ever hear anybody talk about that. If you look on my webpage, you'll see a link to it. There's a story on it on the internet that somebody from the Air Force put on there after that information was declassified. But anyway, we refueled and we took off and we flew. And North Vietnam, much to my surprise, reminded me of almost like the Rocky Mountains or the Sierras. High mountains with snow on the peaks, above, much of it above tree line, and we were flying right along the side of the mountain, close to avoid detection by the SAM sites that were along the valley. They had charted out a course to keep us as far away from them as possible, and we had only one escort with us, and it was an A-1E, which we codenamed Hobo, which flew up above the clouds and kept an eye out for us in case we ran into any problems. And our mission was to go and to see if we could find the parachutes for these 2 pilots that had bailed out. And if we saw the parachutes they were going to put us on the ground, and we were going to try to find the pilots and rescue them. If you listen to that story by the Air Force pilot that got shot down and captured, how quickly he was captured, I guess there wasn't too much chance of finding these guys, but the amount of intel we had was limited. They may have known, the Air Force or the Navy may have known more than we did, as far as they were still alive or on the ground or running or whatever. But what happened was, as we were flying along, it was getting dark, and the captain said over the loudspeaker, or through the crew chief, I guess, he told us to look forward. He said, you can see the lights of Hanoi. And we looked up, and you could see the glow in the sky from the city of Hanoi. So that's how close we were. And about that time, the hobo came jetting down through the clouds. This is, for those that don't know, a hobo, or A1E, is a propeller-driven aircraft. I loved them. They were my favorite for post-air support in Vietnam. But they were vintage Korea, if not World War II, with a slide-back canopy. You could, a glass canopy, and you could see the pilot in the canopy. But he drove down through the clouds, and he radioed the ships, and he said, take a look up, and we looked up, and there was a MiG flying along in the opposite direction we were flying. So the Jolly Green Giants quickly dove through the clouds. Very scary moment, because, like I said, these are very steep, jagged mountains right next to us. And I had no idea if we were going to run into the mountain or run into a peak underneath of us or what. But we went underneath the clouds, and then everything was pretty damn dark because the clouds were blocking out what sunlight was left. And the captain, after a few minutes, aborted the mission, turned around, and flew us back to NKP for another 6-hour flight. And that was the end of my first mission. Never got on the ground, never saw the pilots. By the way, that's the title of my book, is Bright Light. And that's the code name that was used by Macri Saad for a search and rescue mission. The bright light being like a searchlight from the Second World War, when they put the searchlights on and they looked for the enemy aircraft in the air. So that was it. Flew back. That was the end of the mission. Never heard what happened to the pilots. That was my first one.
How many missions did you go on?
I went on a total of 9 missions, and consider myself fortunate to be alive today. Some of them were pretty bad. My last one was another bright light mission, and we were pinned down by a battalion-sized element. It was a 12-man team. We were pinned down by 2,000 North Vietnamese regulars. And I was injured pretty badly, as were most of the other men that were with me. One of the Vietnamese was killed, but we, to put it quite, frankly, I called out to God. I said, Jesus, get me out of here, and I'll become a priest. And I meant it. I thought I was dead. I had a hand grenade go off within 6 or 8 inches of my feet. I was laying down, so it didn't blow my legs off. But the concussion from the grenade and the shrapnel that I got completely numbed my body from my neck down. I couldn't move my arms at first. I couldn't move my legs. I didn't even know I had any legs. I looked down to see if I had them. And when I could finally move my arms a little bit, I pushed myself up, and I actually fell over backwards in the bomb crater because I had no control over my legs. So that was the only time that I was ever afraid in Vietnam, because I was so badly injured. And I don't know, and I just say this in the book, I don't know if it's because we were so well trained, brainwashed, or just plain stupid.
I think it was.
That was the only.
I think it was a combination of all three, Steve.
Yeah.
I think it was a combination of all three.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
You know,
Uh,
I watch these young people play their video games, uh, and they got these. I don't know the titles of those things, but uh, it's good guys, bad guys, military type stuff, shooting, blowing up, sneaking around corners. And I watch kids play these things, and I can't watch it too long because I'm an old fogey. It kind of makes me angry inside because people don't have any idea of what combat is like, and if you never had to be in combat, thank God that you was never in combat. But yet, you said it a while ago, we must not forget. We can't. We must not. If we have to shout it from the rooftops and proclaim it any way we possibly can, we can't let people forget the sacrifices that was made. And when I watch these video games and watch kids, they're almost traumatized playing these things, and I'm thinking, my God, if you really knew what it was like, it's not getting shot and then push a button and you bounce right back up. It's permanent stuff. I mean, it's real. It stinks. It hurts. There, there's emotions, and if we just can't let people forget, Steve. There's no way, no day under the sun that we can possibly let people forget. Just like the Second World War, there's not many that knows anything about the Second World War or Korea.
the war that ended all wars.
Pardon?
My father-in-law was a carrier pilot down in the South Pacific, and I asked him lots of questions. My father was a cadet, but he never got his wings lashed out, but he was in the Second World War. And you're absolutely correct. And there was a couple of things I wanted to add. That bright light mission that I was just describing when I got badly injured,
Mm-hmm.
that bright light was looking for ST Idaho, the first team that I was on.
Mm-hmm.
And they were never found. And if you go to the wall in Viet Nam, in Washington, D.C., I forget the panel number, but you can find Glenn Oliver Lane, because he's MIA. They never found him. And Robert Owen was with him. And these things are for real. Like you say, Ken Cryan, the guy that I mentioned, was such a wonderful young man, and we were really good friends. We were roommates in the camp. He was a camp engineer. We had a lot of fun together. Then he volunteered for the team. And he got injured. He and I were on parallel missions. And he got injured, and he was being extracted by a Marine helicopter on a jungle penetrator.
Mm-hmm.
And the damn communist sat there on the ground with an anti-aircraft gun and shot 8 or 10 holes through his helpless body as he was being pulled up under that helicopter. Didn't bother shooting the helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
Just shot him. And I had to go and identify his body. And those kids that play those games, they have no clue.
Mm-hmm.
They have no clue. And, in the end of my book, that's another thing I say is we made a promise, and people don't understand. The people of South Vietnam wanted to be free. Now, there was communists in South Vietnam, and there was Viet Cong, and there was people who wanted to be communists. But the majority of the people in South Vietnam wanted to be free, and that's why we were there.
Mm-hmm.
And we kicked ass. I'll say that again. We kicked ass. The Marines kicked ass. The Army kicked ass. Everybody. We won every battle that we were in. Every single one. And we did not lose the war in Vietnam, like Walter Cronkite said. We were not in a quagmire in Vietnam. We won the war in Vietnam, but it was given away by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger and the other slime balls in our Congress. And it was done because the country being on fire, like you talked about earlier. But it's a mistake we can never make again. We lost 58,000 wonderful American boys, and some women too. And we did it for the freedom of people that wanted to be free, and we bailed out and turned our back on them and broke our promise. And I'm embarrassed to admit that today. I think it's really, really sad, and I'm afraid that we're, likely to do the same thing over in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah.
Pull the plug, and it's, it's just not right. Nixon promised money to support the Vietnamese military in defending themselves, and he never, Congress never provided the money. The South Vietnamese soldiers actually ran out of bullets when they were being attacked by the North Vietnamese in the end, after we left. So we can't do that to another country, and war is hell. I don't think we should be in any war, but sometimes it's just absolutely necessary to defend another people. That we really need to take care of our veterans. Do you know, I saw in Vietnam Veterans of America's literature today that there are actually more homeless Vietnam veterans on the streets of America today than got killed in Vietnam?
I believe that.
There's more than 58,000 homeless Vietnam veterans on the streets of America. I think that sucks. Those are my brothers,
Right.
Every chance to try to help them, but it's a big country and there's a lot of people.
When you finally left Vietnam and you come home in 1968, and of course we talked about the condition of the country was in. How about you internally? Because we all came back scarred. And there's still a lot of us that's still not right. Just ask my wife of 45 years, she'll tell you I never was right. But nonetheless, there are so many that's still not right. How was you when you come back home? Were you able to adjust back into civilian life? Was it hard? Did you go through some rough spots? How was it?
It was very hard. And quite frankly, I can relate to the 58,000 homeless veterans that are on the streets right now. I was never homeless. I've been richly blessed. But I came home and I self-medicated with alcohol and drugs, like a lot of other people did. When I first came home from Vietnam, they didn't know what PTSD was, but they had something they called post-Vietnam syndrome. And, a lot of us, most of us, suffered with it. Because of the nature of the war itself, plus the manner in which we went to and from the war, plus we returned to a country that didn't even want us. They didn't want to, be around us. They didn't acknowledge, our service or our sacrifice. So it was difficult, and it's only by the grace of God that I was, saved from the drug subculture of the 60s and 70s and later from the alcohol, and got plugged into the VA. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, still under treatment for it today. And I really, think we need to take a closer look at our veterans and try to help them out more than we are.
Yeah, I'll say. We get all excited about the sports figures that's making multi-millions, the Hollywood celebrities, this, that, those, and these. But to me, Steve, and I'm sure it's to you and all of our other brothers, the real heroes of this country are those men and women that wore the uniform down through the years right up to the present time. That's the heroes. That's the people that we need to hold up on the pedestal, because without those people, all these other things wouldn't even be. And we do need to tell people, and we do need to help people. And it took me a lot of years, Steve, after I come back. In fact, we had 4 kids, 1 son, 3 daughters. Son was the oldest. He'll be 44 in June. But I imagine he was probably in his late 20s, early 30s. And I wrestled those same kind of demons. And one day we were working together, and I said, it finally dawned on me that when we come back from Vietnam, it wasn't us that needed debriefed. It was the civilians back here that needed an education of what we just went through, because it was all backwards. We just didn't fit in, did we, Steve?
Exactly.
It was.
I came home, I went to school, and I lived in I got married right away and got divorced real quick for the same reasons we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up living in a house which I referred to as a commune. It was all Vietnam veterans. The owner of the house was Bill Haggard, who was a Green Beret, who contracted Hodgkin's disease in Vietnam, and who died probably 10 years ago from complications from his Hodgkin's disease. But he very quickly got involved with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and this house was in Costa Mesa, California, and it was really something. And to make a long story short, one night Jane Fonda came with her bodyguards, and she had just returned from North Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And I was appalled, and left the house and wouldn't come back until they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
Another time the house was raided by the FBI, who were looking for the Symbionese Liberation Army, because they got word they were looking for Patty Hearst, and they got word that some of the people that were frequenting the house were from the SLA.
Mm-hmm.
So all that stuff is going on. I'm right in the middle of it, and I was not opposed to the Vietnam War. I was very much, supportive of my brothers that were still there. I remember one day on my college campus, Angela Davis came marching through the campus with a bunch of these Vietnam veterans. One of them, Bill Haggard, the one that owned the house that I was talking about, was walking in the parade with Angela Davis. And they're a mock coffin,
Mm-hmm.
And I belonged to the veterans group on the campus. One of the veterans there in the group went over and tackled Bill Haggard, and I thought he was going to run him through with a K-bar for participating in that thing. It was a crazy time. It was a really crazy time. And it hasn't ended for a lot of Vietnam veterans.
No, it's still, there's still a storm raging on the inside. And it still gets pretty dark on the inside sometimes. But it's good to know. Have you went to the wall in D.C., Steve?
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier about crying. I hadn't shed a tear. My emotions were pretty much dead. which is one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. I had shut down emotionally, which made it very difficult to carry on a relationship. I've been married now for 36 years, and God bless my wife. She's put up with, the horrors of me.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to the wall. I forget, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That was the first time I cried. I started crying and I couldn't stop. I went and found Ken Cryan's name. I found Sergeant Lane's name, and a few other guys that I knew that are on the wall. I know a dozen, probably at least, probably a lot more than that. But from there, we went to Arlington Cemetery. I stopped crying when we left the wall. And my wife said, "What are you crying for? Why'd you start crying?" And I said, "I don't know." And then as we drove in the gates of Arlington, and I saw the first of the markers there, I started crying again.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a healing process for me, I guess. But I would encourage anyone who wants to know more about my story to get a copy of Bright Light. It has a lot of neat, fun stuff in it too, besides the horrors of the war, things that went on in the camp. Being a medic, I got involved in trying to prevent bubonic plague outbreak with the other medics, and had a blast doing that. And some other funny stories that you don't usually see in books about a war, but like I wrote in the beginning of my book, these guys were all the boy next door. Maybe he mowed your lawn or he delivered your newspaper. Remember those things? Remember you used to have newspaper boys that would drive around on their bikes and throw newspapers on the front porch?
Yep, I was one of them.
Me too.
Yeah.
I've seen one of those in forever,
Yeah. That was my first real job.
Yeah, me too.
Does it seem like, to me, it seems like so long ago, but yet it seems like yesterday? Is that how you feel?
Exactly. And I occasionally still get intrusive thoughts where I can smell the cordite and see the scene as clear as if I was there, as if I was standing in that valley. I call it a flashback, call it whatever you want, but that happens to me on a rarer occasion today than it did years ago. But it seems like a lifetime ago, and yet when I think about some detail, all of a sudden I can clearly remember some fine detail of what happened one particular day. So yeah, I had the same feeling.
Every time I hear the whoop, 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 whoop of helicopter, of chopper blades, what Walter Cronkite used to say, "You are there." Every time I hear the whoop, 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 whoop of the blades, I am there.
Yeah. You and me both.
Yeah.
That's how we launched on all our missions. That's another quick story I'd like to tell.
Sure.
Since you brought up helicopter. On one of my missions in the Ashal Valley, which was a long, famous valley where there were a lot of Americans killed over the years of the Vietnam War. We were doing a lot of reconnaissance work in advance of an American invasion of the Ashal Valley to kind of flush out the North Vietnamese that had run up into this valley to regroup after Tet. We ran into an ambush. We broke through the ambush, and we broke out far enough away so that we could call in to be extracted by the helicopters. And the jungle was very thick, triple canopy, beautiful, beautiful jungle, but 3 layers deep. The tallest trees were probably 175 feet tall. Then there was another layer of canopy, maybe 75 to 100 feet. and another one lower down to the ground about 50 feet. Well, we found an opening maybe 8 feet in diameter, and we called for extraction. And helicopters came, and they couldn't come in and get us, so they dropped ropes down to us. We called them McGuire rigs, 120-foot nylon rope with a nylon strap on the bottom of it, and you'd sit on the strap, and there was a loop you'd put your wrist through, and you'd give them the signal, and they'd pull you up through the trees and fly off back to the camp. All this while the enemy is firing at the helicopter and you the whole time. So this particular mission, this helicopter picked me up, and they flew off down into the Assault Valley. There was an old Special Forces camp that had been run over by the North Vietnamese and abandoned some years before. And there was an airstrip there called the Alui Airstrip. But no one would ever think of landing on that airstrip because there was bomb craters and caves all over the place where the North Vietnamese would hide out along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But this helicopter pilot had never flown for us before, and he's got two men hanging on these ropes 120 feet below his helicopter, and he's low on fuel, and this is using up more of his fuel, so he carefully sets us down on the Alui Airstrip, and we climb in the helicopter, and then we take off again. And that happened, in 1968. So I wrote about it in my book, and then 6 months after my book was published, I got a call from a guy named Mike Huey, and he asked me a bunch of questions. Turns out that Mike Huey was on the helicopter that day that picked me up, and I was going to a special operations reunion out in Las Vegas, and Mike had been invited to go to that particular meeting. So I met him there, met him and subsequently some of the pilots that were in charge of those helicopters that picked us up and rescued. I just thought that was an amazing story 40 years, after it happened. But pretty interesting,
One thing I have learned, Steve, over the years, it took me a long time to learn it, and I still don't apply it the way I should. We're not alone, brother. We have each other, each and every one of us. We all have each other. And if that's all we have, that's more than enough, because we have each other. And, Steve, if people want your book, they can go to brightlight1968.com and get it there. And where's the other place? They can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. But you would rather...
Booklocker.com.
Booklocker, is that it?
Yeah, but you put it on your...
Yeah, I put it on the radio show page. Yeah.
Booklocker.com. It's also listed on my webpage. My webpage is primarily for signed copies. If someone wants a signed copy, they can get it from me, or they on the top of that order page is also Booklocker, and they can go order directly from Booklocker.
Okay, and Booklocker.com is on the radio show page, so you can go there and just hit that link. It'll take you right there, and you can do what you need to do. Steve, I thank you, my brother, for taking the time. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And one more time, thank you for your service, and welcome home, brother. I'm glad.
Welcome home to Pepper 5, friend, and thank you for inviting me.
No problem. And listen, I'll have you come back again, too.
Well, God bless you.
God bless you, Steve. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
There we have it, ladies and gentlemen. It's just it's hard to explain sometimes. In fact, it's hard to explain all the time. But go read that book, Bright Light. You will be amazed. And listen, when you go there and you read it, or when you read Colonel Ellis's book, Leading with Honor, let it really sink deep down inside of you. And read it slow. Because if you read it slow, there's a possibility that you might hear the sounds. You might smell the smells. You might feel some of the feeling. And you might just know that you know. We must never, ever, ever forget the supreme sacrifice that men and women have made for the freedom of this country. And I'll be right back.
Today, his lover left and said she'd come back someday. But 20 years on the same park bench he lay, with just a bottle and these words left to say. She said, hold on, baby, hold on to your heart. She said, trust me, baby, trust me, trust will never part. But there's no train coming down those long tracks. I get the feeling she will never be back. What put this man into this terrible state? How can he sit here and continue to wait? It's called love. It's called love. It's called love. It's called love. Love sometimes takes on a new disguise. Just when you thought you knew what you had found. I held his hand and said I understood. I introduced myself and hoped that he would. But then he told me we both had the same name. He was my father. I felt so betrayed. But then he said, hold on, baby. Hold on to your heart. To your heart. He said, trust me, baby. Trust me, trust will never part. But
That's foot tapping, finger snapping, head bobbing, booty shaking kind of music. Ah, thank you, Isaac. I knew you was in the house. I want to thank you for tuning into the George Espinlov Show tonight. To all my friends down the street, around the corner, across this great nation, and around the world, it is indeed a privilege to be able to come on the air Monday through Friday with the George Espinlov Show. And Saturday and Sunday now, 7 days a week. Saturday evening at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we are now running the ministry of Pacific Garden Mission out of Chicago, Illinois. That's been around since 1877, and they have been producing real dramatization. I get my tongue twisted when I say that. Real dramatization of real live people that were in dire straits in one way, shape, or form, and they heard the gospel, and they come out on the other side in total victory. We're running their ministry and their dramatizations Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, live right here, and Sunday morning at 7 a.m. There is, and it's a different production Saturday night and Sunday morning. Well, here's what's coming up.
Forgiving infidelity is extremely difficult. A woman called Terson grew up with an unfaithful father, and then she married a man who was unfaithful. Don't miss the inspiring story of how she forgave when she found someone who was faithful and true. Listen to her dramatized testimony coming soon on Unshackled.
And that will be on Saturday evening, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Tune in for that. You will love it. It's like listening to old-time radio all over again. And if you've never heard old-time radio the way it used to be back in the day, here is your prime time opportunity. Join us Saturday night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for Unshackled. And again, Sunday morning at 7 a.m. for Unshackled. My. Go to Booklocker. Booklocker.com. And this there, in the little search box, you can just type in there bright light. And Steve Perry's book will come up. Untold Stories of the Top Secret War in Viet Nam. Get that book. Read it. It will enlighten you. It perhaps will make you come alive. And you'll hear, possibly see things in your own mind. And you'll feel just a little bit of what it was like. Top secret black operations of Mac V. Sog during the Vietnam War. My oh my. Such a good book. Get it, read it, and then pass it on to someone else. That's booklocker.com. Oh my, where's time went? Time went by so fast. There's so much else that I wanted to do tonight, but we're just not going to get it done. We're just not going to get it done. Let me tell you, where is my little gizmo? Anybody ever wonder? Nobody's emailed me yet and asked me, what in the world is your little gizmo? If you email me, and ask me, what is your gizmo, your little gizmo? I'll tell you what it is. But I'm checking my little gizmo because tomorrow is Wednesday, February 6th, and we have Mr. Brett. Is it Brereton? I'm probably wrong. Brett Brereton, who was a federal agent, Homeland Security, 29 years, and he has written the book Homeland Insecurity. And he's going to sit down and he's going to talk about the inside of Homeland Security and what the policies are and some of the quirks and some of the things that we just don't know about. He's going to take us inside tomorrow night. Brett Brantham. So you come and be with us at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. There's a lot of questions to ask. Why? Tell me why Homeland Security is buying up all of these rounds. Tell me that. Tell me why FEMA has these camps set up that they can train people. Tell me why. We're going to ask. We're going to ask Brett tomorrow night, and I'm sure he'll be able to tell us something, because he's going to take us on the inside track, and I'm looking forward to it. So pass the word. Brett Brantham from Homeland Security. He's retired now. Spent 29 years. So tune in and be with us. You're going to have to forgive me again, because I've got that sneezy, snotty, sniffly thing all over again. So if it sounds like I'm talking through my nose, it's because I'm talking through my nose. So you'll have to just kind of forgive me, will you? I don't see anything funny about that. I was being very, very serious. Oh no. That was Ethel. That was Ethel doing her descending scale. Some night we'll put Ethel on here and she can really belt one out for you, okay? We'll see what happens then. Oh my. What was that, Charlie? You don't know? Okay. You're going to call 911? Ring it up.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Isn't that wonderful? That's just great. Wow. Hey, my many, many thanks to Steve Perry, author of Bright Light, Untold Stories of the Top Secret War in Vietnam. Steve was a medical specialist with Special Forces when he served in Vietnam, and he went on top secret missions, did his book, and you can read all about it. Bright Light, Untold Stories of the Top Secret War in Vietnam. I want to give a great big shout out to my friend Brenda White down there in Orlando, Florida. Brenda, love you with all my heart. And if you want to listen to some good shows, ladies and gentlemen, go to Brenda White Shows. She has more than one show on. She has Pastor Collier out of Chicago, Illinois, and you just love listening to Pastor Mitty Collier out of Chicago, Illinois. And it might surprise you if you Google Pastor Collier. I'll get it right. I'm having a hard time speaking for spluttering tonight. But I want to say thank you, Brenda, for your kind words and your lovely comments that you sent us today. I want to thank everyone for your support, for your kind words, for your prayers, and all the great things. And most of all, thank you for listening. Without you, it would just be useless. We'd be sitting here talking into thin air. But because of you, we know, and we purpose way down deep inside of our little pea-picking heart that we are going to try to make this even better. With each and every passing day, we're going to try to make this even better than it was. Pink, you know what I'm saying? Because it'll just be lovely to make you as crazy as the rest of us. Yes, we're looking for loons. We are looking for loons. nighttime, I hope you have a good night. If it's daytime already where you're at, I hope you have a great day. But regardless of whatever it is, wherever you are, I trust that you'll tune in again tomorrow night. Same time, same station, right here on the Spreaker Network. We'll be coming back tomorrow night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Come and join us. Bring a friend. Tell one. Tell all. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. So until then, this is George Espinlaub saying good night. And before I say God bless you, we're going to take you out of here with Friday Night Truck Stop. That's the way this place is around here. It's like a Friday night truck stop all the time. Until then, good night, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is George Espinlaub saying good night, and God bless you.